What habit does the majority of people find normal, but others find absolutely terrible? The habit of adjusting your fingers before flipping a card. When I was a child, I saw a scene in a detective series where the murderer injured the bottom corners of a card in a book with pain. When flipping the card, the victim adjusted the fingers. In the end, she was hurt and died. You may or may not believe this, but it's been 30 years and I still can't do it. I experience strange feelings when I see someone else doing it. The way people snuggle or exhale without closing their mouths also confuses me. I wonder how many people do this openly and without pain. Or when they snuggle, exhale in their hand, and then continue touching everything with their painful hands. I was taught that you should hug with your arm when you're not holding a child in your hands. Exhaling in your hands and not washing them is a crime. Standing at the register and having someone stand too close to you while you're paying? I need space, God. One of the coolest side effects of COVID was that people finally kept their distance. It was wonderful when people followed this rule. I work at a register, and I get happy when an elderly lady pulls out money from her wallet to pay. At the beginning of the pandemic, customers would place their hands on the register keyboard, and we would refuse to touch money on it. Many of my colleagues think it's normal to cut meat right in front of the table. Now I live in fear that someone might find a piece of neck in my coffee. And I can't stop hearing the sound of the cutter. It reminds me of when I worked at a big store, in a restaurant, and one of my colleagues used kitchen knives to cut meat right in the kitchen and would just place it back into the food. I think I shouldn't mention that I took food out of the house afterward. Talking on the phone loudly in a public place also makes me angry. No one cares how you talk. If you don't like holding the phone to your ear, buy a headset. TikTok videos or other sounds in public spaces, or even in small groups, also upset me. A woman did this on my 5-hour flight to Hawaii. I kept looking around to see if anyone else found it strange. I can't say it's normal. It's more of a sign of a lack of passion. And the garbage on the streets, especially in the UK, is awful. Every morning there's garbage in the garden because the wind blows it around. I live in the US, but it's just as bad here. One of the main reasons I'm happy we live close by now is because of the trash flying around. Last week we drove through the UK, and my 8-year-old daughter kept pointing out trash and graffiti, asking why people do this. Yeah, really, why? Trying to talk on the phone, but also supporting the conversation at the same time is difficult. This school year, my teenage sister is living with me. I feel so happy when she comes into the kitchen and talks to me. But then suddenly she switches topics. And only a few minutes later, I realize she's been on the phone talking to a friend the whole time. That's crazy. Talking on the phone during the checkout in a store really bothers me. I work in retail, where the customer has to speak to me to get what they need, and I get really frustrated when people are so busy with their phone conversation that they don't hear what I'm saying or asking. It's even worse when they come into the store and say they're in a hurry, and then mostly ignore me while they're on the phone, only answering my questions briefly without any details before returning to their conversation. I have to interrupt them to figure out what they need. And when I realize that the person I'm talking to is using the same hand to touch everything, then I have to keep working with those same hands without washing them. Some people don't wash their hands after using the toilet when they're at home. I just don't get it. You're touching everything around you. Parking in second places in New York is an epidemic, and it really annoys me. Especially when there's a spot just 5 to 6 meters away where you could park normally. It blocks movement and causes harm. It's incredibly selfish and awful. Honestly, how self-absorbed do you have to be to stand on the street and think that parking in that spot is fine? One time my friend and I were eating chips and Cheetos, and everyone knows that your fingers get covered in orange powder. I saw my friend starting to lick his fingers and I was shocked. Once you lick your fingers, you're done. You can't keep going into the bag. I handed him the bag, surprised. People who don't wash their hands before cooking or eating, talking on the phone in a public restroom booth. I'm always asked if I'm yelling so the person on the other end can hear the truth. In those moments, I always want to say loudly that the person on the phone must be very sad. Maybe they're brave, but if not, I hope their counselor hears me.